There we go. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Senate Education. It is Friday, April 23rd at 1:20 p.m. in the afternoon. And we are going to start our work today by welcoming, is it pronounced Penna? Ms. Penna?
Pena.
Pena, thank you. Thank you. It's great having you with us. And Ms. Pena has been appointed to serve on the State Board of Education. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have you here. So what we've been asking everyone is to just say a little bit about themselves. Tell us why you're interested in being on the state board and some of the work that you hope to do there. And then we may have some questions for you.
Okay.
How's that sound?
Yeah.
Should we introduce ourselves then?
Actually, that would be a great idea. Why don't we go around and say who we are and our districts. So why don't we start with you, Senator Perchlik?
Hi, Angelita. I'm Andrew Perchlik. I represent Washington County, and it's my second term.
Senator Hooker?
Hi, Angelita?
Angelita.
Angelita, I'm Cheryl Hooker, and I'm a senator from Rutland County.
Senator Terenzini?
Hey, good afternoon. I'm Josh Terenzini, a senator from Rutland County as well.
And I'm Brian Campion, senator from Bennington County. And Ms. Pena, where are you from? Washington County?
I currently live in Addison County.
Addison County, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, welcome. Thrilled you're here. And the floor is yours.
Okay. So hello, my name is Angelita Pena. I live here in Addison County, and I'm a student at Mount Abraham Union High School / Middle School. I was born in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I lived there until I was about 11, and then I came here, and I lived in Bennington for a year with my family. No, I went to North Bennington.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah.
To the elementary school there.
Yeah, because there was a little bit of conflict with schools, and I wasn't able to go to the school that I wanted to. So we just decided to go to one of the kind of a little bit out of county schools, I think. I don't remember.
Sure. Yeah.
So, I went to school there in 5th grade, and then I moved up to Moncton when I was 12, and I went to Moncton Central School, and I've been going to Mount Abe ever since. So
and what year are you at Mount Abe?
I'm a sophomore.
Sophomore, okay. Terrific.
Yes. Yeah, it's an experience, high school. 100%. But in terms of what I want to do on the board is I guess I couldn't really explain it or put it into words. The best way I can kind of word it is I just want to kind of experience the community in a more in-depth way.
Okay.
You know, moving here from New Mexico, it's very different in Vermont. It's very different. And I think that being on the board has really pushed me to kind of find the different struggles Vermont has, even among students, and just, it's definitely been a Vermont learning experience being on the board. And I don't know, I just always wanted to make a change as well, even if it's just by kind of learning how, government works on a state level. And I just want to be able to reach out to students and kind of bring their struggles to you guys and people on the board, because I think that that is often lost, especially being on the board. Finance is a very big thing, it's kind of what I hear every single day, and the separation of districts. And I don't often hear, the problems of students. There was one time where we talked about special needs education, which is awesome because my sister is special needs. So I know a little bit about how that works, but hearing the in-depth kind of what goes on, it's like, whoa, that's a little bit of a problem. But I think it's also hard to address that problem specifically because, hiring teachers and budget. And so I've learned a lot, and my opinions have definitely changed by listening to that. But I think my biggest goal is just to bring the student voice more into the conversation than it is currently.
That's great. How long have you been on the board now?
I've been on it. My first meeting was August.
Okay. So, so do you feel, do you feel like you're able to bring that voice? Or let me put it this way. Do you feel as though you're being heard?
So far, yes. I think that we sent out the COVID survey.
Yeah.
When I first came on, that started being worked on. And I think that was pretty awesome, because not only did you guys hear it, but so did the entire state.
Yeah.
And obviously I can't, have one-on-one conversations with each of you and like, what do you think about this? Like, do you plan on using that information to try and make adjustments? Like, I can't have those conversations because we're not in person and I can't contact everyone, obviously. But I think that was a good start from where I'm sitting. And I think that the more in depth I can bring things and the bigger the problems get, I'm hoping people would listen more and start taking those into consideration.
That's great. Senator Persley.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Angelita, I should know this, but it's a 2-year term?
Yes.
Right, so this would be first year, then next year you'd be a voting member. That's how it works, right? So there's another student that's there now that's voting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, thank you for being willing to serve on the board, and I think it's a great opportunity, and it's something that I learned about my last term, that we had students on the education board, and it's something that I think we should find more opportunities to put students on other boards. So
yeah,
as you said, it's a great way to learn. I'm originally from Colorado. When I first moved to Vermont, there's a big difference in just spending time with local select boards and town clerks and how things work in Vermont is a great education. So it's a great opportunity for students. So I don't really have any questions but it's great. Thank you for being here and willing to serve on the board.
Yeah. I think interacting with students, like, I am a student, but I'm very opinionated, and I grew up in like poverty. Like, we were asking for state assistance. And I think that, maybe you guys do this, but just kind of going to a school and just talking to the students, even if it's like a broke school, you never know what you're going to hear. So I think there's a lot of value in having student voice.
Yeah, absolutely. Senator Terenzini.
Thank you, Senator Campion. What are your plans after high school?
I don't know. All I know is I just want to kind of help in some way, shape, or form. I have a long line of educators in my mom's side of the family. So if I go into education, I want to do special education, kind of advocating for special needs kids, because I think a lot of the time they also go unheard, and it's special education. A majority of us don't understand it. A lot of us can't relate to kind of the struggles that they go through specifically. So yeah, I just kind of want to be there to help with that process. And if I'm not a special educator, I want to go into medicine, which I've heard is 2 very separate paths, but I think they're both very valuable.
Well, the good news is that we as a state, it's not good news, but it's good news for you. We as a state need doctors and nurses and special educators. So any of those 3 you check off, you're going to be doing your state a great service.
Yeah.
Good point.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Any other questions? I was just wondering, Ms. Pena, do you get paid? Are students reimbursed? I think the state board members are, but I'm not sure.
Students do get reimbursed.
They do. Good. Okay, so you're getting a reimbursement for some things. So, but you're getting some kind of compensation for your service. That's great. I'm so glad to hear that.
I was shocked about. I honestly thought it was just volunteer. I went on and I was like, wait, I'm getting money for this? Like, oh, I did not know that.
Senator Hooker.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Angelita. This is very interesting listening to young voices, and, talking about what they hope for the future of education. My question is a couple of things. First of all, how do you feel about doing all of this on Zoom? I know for me, being older, Zoom has been interesting. I'm sorry that you haven't had a face-to-face contact. I assume you have not yet since you came on in August. Are you looking forward to that, or do you think that the Zoom method, the remote method, is a method that should continue, especially since you're in Addison? Going down to Montpelier to have a meeting could be a problem. Do you think that the technology is helpful? Do you feel that there's a need to be in person? That's one question. My second question that you can answer later is, did you apply for this? And how did you come to apply for it?
Let me break that down real quick. So even though I'm young, I am still not well met with technology compared to a lot of people I know. I still struggle. I had to get on this meeting 15 minutes early because I tend to run into a lot of roadblocks. So thankfully I didn't run into that today. But so Zoom is interesting. It can have some problems. I prefer in person, but I think at the moment it is helpful for me to do this in Zoom because it is a lot of driving. I don't have a driver's license yet, so I would have to rely on someone else to drive me to and from my meeting locations. So I'm gonna go ahead and say that I would rather have Zoom stay for now because of just traveling. It's not exactly the easiest for me. But at the same time, there is a lot of value in in-person meeting. So, and then in applying, my whole school received an email from my principal advertising the application, and it was just, I had to go into the Vermont government website and find the application, fill it out. I got some, I forget what they're called, but people basically, letter of recommendation, have some people write me a letter of recommendation. I actually had a friend that also applied to this. So it was kind of fun between us just being like, oh, like, did you get this yet? Like, but, so yeah, it was a pretty basic application. Had a interview with the governor, and then next day I was told I got it. So
excellent. Well, thanks for stepping up.
Yeah,
thank you very, very much for stepping up. And perhaps this will be your first step into public service. We may have before us a Governor Penier or Congressman Penier, and we hope that you'll continue to pursue your interests and your passions, particularly as it relates to education or medicine, whatever other direction you might head in. So thank you. It really does mean a lot to all of us for you to take your time and not only be with us today, but to give the service that you're giving to the state of Vermont. So thank you. Yeah. Any other questions for Ms. Pena? Ms. Pena, any final words or questions or anything for us? Certainly you can keep in contact. We will certainly have you back, I'm sure. We'd love to hear more, but wondering if you have any final comments.
Not that I can think of currently. I guess my only kind of last words are, student voice is very important. You might not value it now, but you really never know what you're going to hear. And even though we're young and we haven't lived as long of a life as you guys have, we have had experiences, we have had our problems, and we take in a lot more information from adults than you think. We do pick up on when people are struggling with money, we do pick up on mental health, and we do pick up on politics and the problems surrounding that. And we are very opinionated. So I think that just listen, I guess. You never know when someone's going to say something and it's going to be lost in the wind, but it could have been very, very important. So those are just my last words.
I think that's a great point. And I'm really excited that you're willing to help us with that, for you to bring that voice to this committee. I can't tell you how important it is and how much we appreciate it. And so we'll plan to have, we're heading toward the end of the session, but hopefully we can have you back in January after you've been on the board a little longer. And at that point, it would be great for you to share any additional information you have or things that you've learned. But in the meantime, if things pop up where you believe that our committee should be hearing what you're learning, please just reach out to us and we'll be happy to hear from you. It would actually help inform our work, and we'll know that you're on the other end. If we come upon anything that we have a question about, or if we need a witness, we need to hear from a student, it'd be great to hear from you and or some of your peers. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Great. Okay. Great. Well, have a great afternoon. And thank you again for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Okay. Bye-bye now.
Bye.
It's exciting. I think that's great. Really, really great. I agree with Senator Perslick. The more young people we can get involved on committees and things, the better. Turning now to H106, an act relating to equitable access to a high quality education through community schools. We have, David, is it Retu?
Retu, yeah,
Retu.
pretty close.
All right, pretty close. Dr. Retu is with us, and Dr. Retu is with the Department of Mental Health. We asked Dr. Retu to come in to, as senators will recall, we're looking at issues of trauma and how can we integrate something into this bill, H106, which will likely pass out the middle of next week, Wednesday. How can we help students who are facing trauma? How can we help support them, address their needs in schools? And one of the things that I think we need to just sort of have more information on is what is trauma exactly? What is it that our students are experiencing? What are some of the problems that we are trying to address, which might, I suspect, will help focus us on coming up with some of those possible solutions. So with that, Dr. Retu, thank you very much for being with us. I know it was a bit last minute, but I appreciate Shana Livingston helping us to pull you in at this point. So the floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you, senators, for inviting me. And please feel free to interrupt and ask questions because, I want to be useful to you. Officially in my role with DMH, I think this is not a bill that we've been tracking closely, and I think we're quite interested in it, and I think we would love to be able to consider it and offer more sort of a legislative opinion. But I was told that that's not my role today. And if we could just have a little bit of time to look at it, I think you might get a more comprehensive response from DMH. So
yeah, thank you for that. And just so senators know, I asked Ms. Livingston to review the bill and have someone come in on Tuesday. So they are working with Jeannie to have someone come in with Tuesday for some specific recommendations.
So let me just, I didn't have a big list of prepared remarks, but let me just talk a little bit about trauma and its developmental effects and how it can play out in schools. And if that's what you're interested in, let me know. If I need to go in a different direction, please tell me. But I guess I'd start by saying that the effects of trauma on kids and development and its lifelong impacts is an area that the mental health field has, I think, increasingly appreciated over the decades. So I think one of the things that we are really understanding is that adversity, early traumatic experiences, and later traumatic experiences too, have real physical impacts on the brain. And not only can, in some people, it lead to sort of classic sort of pictures of PTSD, but even when people don't have any diagnosis, I mean, it fundamentally can alter how kids perceive the world and interact with the world. And I can give you some examples of that often can play out in schools. You've probably heard the term trauma informed, right, in a lot of places. And I think a lot of people are very familiar with that term, but maybe aren't exactly quite sure what that means or exactly what that looks like in different settings. So I can try to help with that if that would be useful. But by trauma, I think we're talking about a whole wide range of experiences that unfortunately children sometimes have to suffer through. So this is everything from different types of maltreatment or abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse. It can include things like bullying, which is a big one that gets talked about these days now. You may also have heard the term ACEs, which stands for Adverse Child Experiences. And this is a list of things that include abuse. It also includes things like divorce, parental incarceration, or parental substance use. I mean, all of these things, you can actually, get a score. You can score a kid. You can score yourselves on, what your ACEs score is in terms of how many of these things. And what we've learned is that the more stress and trauma that a kid has been exposed to, not only are these very powerful predictors of someone's risk factors for future mental health, but what's getting a lot of people really noticing is that these are some of the same largest risk factors for physical health. So, people who have experienced this are not only at risk for suffering depression as adults, they're also at risk for suffering heart disease and other chronic illnesses. And that's been something that's been very eye-opening to a lot of people. And that's why a lot of us in the field say there's no health without mental health, because we're really understanding that solid mental health is foundational for all health going forward. So what's happened, I think, is as all of us are appreciating this in different areas, not just in the mental health sort of treatment community, but also in schools, there's been a bit of a shift about how we interpret child behavior and how we interact with child behavior. And there's been, I think, if you want to focus on schools, I think an appreciation of these things is shifting. There's sort of been a frame shift on how you understand kids who struggle both academically and behaviorally. And that we're moving a little bit away from interpreting a lot of behavior, especially misbehavior in schools, as kind of willful, deliberate actions that are done to hurt other people or to get attention, and more as expressions of some of these early experiences that are a little harder to control and don't respond to the same kind of intervention. They don't respond to things like punishments as well as we used to do that. So think about a kid who is in very early in their life has experienced neglect or emotional abuse or one of these adversities. What we've found is that this physically changes the brain. So the brain is a very adaptive organ, and the brain changes because it realizes it's in a chronically dangerous setting. And so it has to sort of reset itself to be able to deal with that. So the brain can kind of go into this more defensive fight or flight kind of mode because it has to. That's a survival adaptation at the time. But where it can become maladaptive is, say, then the child shifts to a more supportive, less dangerous environment. It's really hard to sort of shut off that adaptation that the brain did. And so that same sort of revving up of the nervous system, where you are perceiving threats in lots of places, you're getting ready to defend yourself, that becomes kind of maladaptive in different situations. But if we understand where that came from, and we understand that this is not necessarily a kid who is trying to push your buttons, who is trying to misbehave, we kind of reframe that as, this is a kid who has had to develop a nervous system to cope with a lot of danger, and is now sort of playing that out in settings where it's not as appropriate. Just like when I talk to kids about this, I sometimes compare it to our immune system. So, our immune system keeps us alive. Like if we are exposed to, a virus or a bacteria or something that shouldn't be there, we want our immune system to activate and fight and get rid of that thing. That keeps us alive. But there are a lot of diseases when the immune system activates when there is no danger, when there is no agent that it has to fight off. And those are, called autoimmune disorders. And they by themselves can be really, really dangerous because you're triggering this response when it's not needed. So I know that's kind of a long preamble, but if you get into that mindset of why kids are misbehaving and how trauma has shaped their brain, then, you start, this is sort of what informs that sort of trauma approach. So you see a kid who maybe has a lot of trouble sitting still and, maybe kind of talks out of turn and maybe gets a diagnosis of ADHD, or maybe they don't. So in the past, that kid gets out of turn, you say, hey, get back in your seat, and they jump up again, and then finally you punish them. Maybe you do something like you take away their recess, which was a classic sort of response. Well, in the trauma, in the sort of the newer model, that's actually the last thing that you want to do, right? You want to give these kids an opportunity to run around and be active and burn energy. So you do something completely different. Or if you have a kid who, is pushed by a teacher and is starting to feel uncomfortable, and the way they lash out is to curse at the teacher or maybe like dump over their desk. So in the past and currently now, that might trigger a suspension, or or at least something. So now you say, well, maybe a suspension is really not the most effective things, because suspensions, punishments, what they do, they're all designed to affect motivation. They're all designed to want us to do the right thing. But if the problem isn't motivation, if the problem is actually a skills deficit or sort of a nervous system that just becomes dysregulated, all the motivation in the world is not going to help. What you need to do is change the environment and build those skills if you want to see those kind of negative behaviors diminish. Just like, I sometimes say, you could pay me $1 million to slam dunk a basketball, and I would be highly motivated to do it, but I still can't do it, and so we've got to work on things other than the motivational system to do that. So let me just stop there. I want to make sure I'm actually getting to what you're looking for, but I thought that might be a nice introduction.
It's a terrific introduction and great information for all of us to have. And I'm glad Senator Lyons is joining us at a perfect time. You may have interacted with Senator Lyons as the chair
Yes.
of welfare.
No, we know each other.
Yeah, that's great. So committee, any questions for Dr. Ritu? So what we're trying to do, and again, I know you haven't really jumped into this bill yet, but we're looking at what are some of the things that we could make sure that teachers know, that principals know, and so there's that piece. But before even getting to that, can you just say, has this always, trauma's, is it getting worse in Vermont? Is it getting worse in the United States? I'm sure you get this question a lot. And I think we all get sort of, speaking for myself, you grew up in a middle-class community, and you think back, gosh, I don't remember these kinds of issues, being so prevalent in a way, even though I'm sure they were there. So I think it's just out of ignorance that I have to ask, is there an uptick, or are we sort of where we were when I was a kid, and it just was less, it was almost beneath the surface. Not that, again, just, it crosses class boundaries. I certainly recognize that, no matter what background you're from, you certainly have trauma.
Well, as you say, Senator, the trauma and adversity has been with us forever. And I also want to say that stress isn't necessarily all bad either, right? So we don't want to get into the mindset like we don't want to ever stress kids, because a certain amount of stress is healthy. But to answer your question without getting into the weeds too much, it does actually look like many forms of adversity are actually decreasing. So it looks like, rates of bullying, especially the classic physical bullying, is on the rise. Divorce rates are reduced. It even looks like there may be, physical abuse and things like that may be decreasing. So some types actually may be lower. On the other hand, other types may be moving in the other direction. So financial adversity, being in poverty, which can have effects on the brain, because we live in a society where there's a greater inequality of income than there used to be. I think those kinds of areas of stress may be going up. So I'm sorry that I can't give you a really straightforward answer. I think there are some types of stress that are increasing, some are decreasing. I think what everyone would agree on is that this just wasn't a lens that we looked at things 30 years ago. And so just even those terms of trauma and adversity, ACEs, even the term ACEs didn't even come out until the 1990s. So I think a lot of what you're noticing is just that we're paying attention to these things in a way that we kind of attributed to other causes in the past.
Yeah. Senator Hooker.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Dr. Vertu. It seems to me that as far as what's increasing and things that didn't exist, Facebook, the internet didn't exist 30, 40 years ago. So are you seeing instances of cyberbullying more, well, obviously more now than in the past, but how is that affecting the kids?
Yeah, cyberbullying is a big thing. And I should also mention that I'm half-time as the medical director for the child division of DMH, but the other half of my time is I'm a practicing child psychiatrist at UVM. So I'm actually seeing kids, I'm seeing families, I'm going to the emergency room when I'm on call. So I have some sort of direct interaction with families. And the whole cyberbullying is a really different kind of beast. And I could talk on it for a long time. I'm actually writing a chapter on it. I was asked to write a chapter on this topic. But it has a different quality that in some ways are less traumatic and in some ways are much more traumatic. One of the ways that cyberbullying can be actually more harmful for kids. So in traditional bullying, the person who bullied you was often outside of your friend group. Like you were the nerd, those were the jocks. The jocks who you didn't interact with sort of very often would come around and sort of shove you around and that would be I'm not minimizing it. Cyberbullying is often happening within your social circle, right? This is happening with your friends. This is people talking about you sort of behind your back, or you think behind your back. So it has an element that becomes, I think, in some ways more insidious within peer relationships. And it's a dimension that I don't think we talk about an awful lot. And then there's a lot of people think that one of the things that the way that social media is maybe having an effect on anxiety and depression on kids is that it's really making some kids feel extremely left out. And that you just have this incredible ability to see what you're not experiencing. All the fun things that everybody else is doing that you haven't been invited to or that you're not part of. And, we all know that phenomenon of how people sort of build a persona on social media that in some ways often kind of pulls out the best things and sometimes leaves out the not so good things. And so it sort of sets this situation up where, like, look at this amazing life that everybody has, all the fun things that they're doing. And I know that in my life, actually, no, I can't do that. And I'm not having that experience. And I think it sets up this feeling of sort of disconnection and loneliness and missing out that may be driving some of this.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments before I just jump back in with another question? So one of the things I'm wondering is back to how do we address this? How are some of the things? And I know that we'll have Shayna probably back in on Tuesday with some specific language possibly, but how can we help these students? What are some of the things that you're looking to have in schools that in a way we might incorporate into our work that we're working on now?
Yeah. So, I mean, there are a number of, a lot of these programs have names or models. They have names where there actually is sort of like a curriculum or that can go to a school and kind of try to alter the culture of how they interact with kids, what they teach kids, how they respond. And Vermont already has one of them. It's called, oh boy, it's going to put me on the spot, like positive behavior. Forget the rest of it.
Positive behavior intervention systems.
Thank you.
Right.
So that's
I don't know that either, but it just came up the other day. So sorry.
No, I appreciate that. That's one, and there are several others. And so, those kind of curriculums, people can argue about what's the best one, but I think, those kind of curriculums where you're actively teaching, what's, social and emotional learning, those can be, really valuable. So that may be one place to go. And then that's kind of on the global level. And then there's, well, what do you do on the individual level? What do you do with a kid who is struggling, who's not getting their homework done because, home is just such a chaotic place and maybe an unsafe place. And how do you reach out and help for those? And that's where when I did a quick read of the bill, I thought it was really interesting to hear about, this person or somebody who might actually be able to be helpful in terms of orienting that. And I think what I'm trying to wrap my head around is there are similar initiatives of bringing similar types of people into primary care settings. They already exist in mental health agencies, and how all that might work together in an ideal way without fragmenting care is something that I want to take a closer look at. And I think DMH would like to take a closer look at.
Very helpful. Other questions, comments? Senator Hooker, are you?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm really fascinated by, your explanation of how these instances, these happenings in a child's life really do affect the development of the brain, the physicality even of the brain, I would expect. And I'm hoping that the good news is that there are ways to reverse this. And
Yeah.
so, and just, do we have time? I mean, as a child continues to develop and gets into, say, the teen years, are there times when we should be intervening, that may or may not have the desired effect? I don't ever want to think that it's too late, but
It's not too late. And thank you, Senator Hooker, for bringing that up, because I think I've been way too doom and gloom about what I've said so far. Not that what I've said is wrong, but it's incomplete. And the flip side of all of this is resilience. And we know that kids are really resilient, and kids can actually, in amazing ways, not seem to suffer the harms that we would often expect them to under the circumstances. And then even more to your point, resilience to some degree is a skill that can be taught and can be enhanced by working with the kid, working with their families, which is really important, and sometimes working with the community at large. So this is not one of these, damaged for life kind of situations, and there is a lot of really good we can do by intervening early and intervening effectively.
And I think that plays into what we're doing here with community schools, because you mentioned a lot of the terms that we've been talking about, interaction with family, interaction with community, and, the whole culture. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for letting me clarify that.
Senator Lyons.
So, thank you, Dr. Vertu. Did I see you on television the other night?
Yeah, I did my regular thing on WCAX.
Yeah, you did a good job.
Thank you.
But the question always comes up, when we start mixing our agency of human services, social determinants and issues around wellness with kids, and we start mixing that into schools, and we need to have an integrated approach. And so one of the things that consistently comes up is who's responsible and how do we do that? And so for me, it's always been everybody should be able to contribute to this challenge. And so maybe your thoughts a little bit about who are the experts and who should be the experts in dealing with these issues in school.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Lyons. And I mean, I have to be totally frank with you, since, starting to work for government, I do get continually frustrated with the silos and these divisions that exist that the brain just doesn't respect. And so it makes things, in my word, way too complicated than they should be by deciding like which bucket things should go into. So I don't mean to dodge your question. I don't have a great explanation. I think the Department of Mental Health is very good at mental health and development, but other agencies have that expertise as well. And I guess all I could say here is, let's just all work together because this clearly transcends a lot of the artificial boundaries that we've set up.
Thank you. I agree. So we're gonna be working hard to get rid of the boundaries.
Thank you.
So I think we have our ledge counsel here and our committee assistant. I think the one thing, and I will be looking to Senator Lyons, and she also has two members of her committee on this committee, as it relates to things that we might put into the bill. But the one thing that now has come up twice, and we just put a note there, and that is, PBIS. There are different ways to, there are, as you said, different curriculums out there. There are different things, but it seems, and I know Senator Lyons raised this yesterday when we were talking, some schools have it, some schools don't, and there might be a way to, again, connect this into this bill. So we'll just flag it for now. Dr. Retnu, anything else for us? Any final comments?
No, I know that there's other people who want to speak, and I can stick around until 2:30 if that would be helpful in case things come up.
That would be terrific. We'd really appreciate it. And thank you so much for framing this. I got a lot out of it, particularly, the analogy to people that have autoimmune issues. That was very clear and really helped me to comprehend what some of children out there are really dealing with.
Good. I'm glad that was helpful.
Thank you. Very helpful.
Mhm.
Mr. Robinson.
Good to see folks.
Thanks for being with us. You know the bill that we're working on and some of the things that we're trying to do to improve it, maybe to edit it, describe it any way you want. But you weighed in early on, and then you wrote to me to talk a little bit after having heard yesterday's conversation. I'm just wondering if you might have a few words and give us some direction from your end as to how we might get to addressing trauma in this bill, and therefore helping the children out there. So
Yeah,
the floor is yours.
definitely. So for the record, Colin Robinson, Vermont NEA, good to see folks, and thank you again for taking time on this bill. I just want to sort of start by talking about some of the work Vermont NEA has been doing broadly, and then I'll get very specific. But you know, the hearing from the folks at the Department of Mental Health, it's really important and impactful work, and our members have been working to shift their practice, as you heard from Andrew Labarge on Wednesday, and bringing a trauma-informed approach to their practice as educators, as an education system. You know, we at Vermont NEA actually have been collaborating with the folks at Chuck Meyer's organization, the Northeast Family Institute, on some trainings over the past several years for educators about trauma-informed practice. And we did a series of webinars throughout 2020. We now have a whole New England-wide consortium that we're working with across all states but Massachusetts on sort of how to best respond in an education context to student trauma, specifically and importantly also addressing the needs and trauma of our BIPOC students. And so I just sort of zoom back by way of saying that this conversation about trauma is deeply important, deeply impactful, and something that we and our members are fully embracing. And we're really trying to work across the entire system to figure out how we can support our students, families, so they can be successful learners, but also be successful members of our society. And obviously, you know, the threads here are very strong. I'm thinking about your conversation around S16 and exclusionary discipline. Obviously, that is deeply intertwined into this conversation. So specifically as it relates to H106, there are a couple things I wanted to speak to that I think gets to actually some of Senator Lyon's, your points about kind of who's responsible. And of course, as you said, the answer to that is we all are. I think in the community schools context, and specifically in H106, and you heard this a little bit from Ms. Myers from Learning Policy Institute on Wednesday, is having sort of making sure that the work of the community school is rooted in the needs assessment, and a needs assessment of the local school is really critical, because you know, the needs of a certain community and a certain group of students and set of parents is going to look different than it might in one other place. And so in my testimony the other week, I provided some recommendations about how a needs assessment could be incorporated to make sure that that could be integrated.
And Colin, just so senators know, that has been reposted. Mr. Robinson's email to me outlining some of these adjustments to the bill are now on our website. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, Senator. So, you know, the idea is that obviously we know our students, our families, and our communities are dealing with not only the collective trauma of this pandemic, but ongoing challenges in various ways, shape, and forms. But what that looks like in one particular school and the needs and resources that need to be brought to bear to support students and families to be successful in their learning, but also in their life, is going to look different. So having a needs assessment as part of the community schools project, as was mentioned on Wednesday, we think is really critical to integrate into this bill. And as Senator Campion mentioned, there's some specific recommended language there. The other part of it, to Senator Lyon's point about who's responsible and the notion of everybody, is having broad stakeholder input and buy-in. So as H106 currently came to you, it has the community schools coordinator, the person who kind of owns the work. But in order for that person to be successful, they need breadth of input, breadth of ownership and collaboration in figuring out the needs of the community, but also implementation and ownership of the work to support the community needs within the community school context. And so the other recommendation we would have is adding in either the terminology. You could find what would work best for you. I recommended some language similar to New Mexico's law, community schools legislation that talks about a site-based leadership team. And so it brings in parents, it brings in civil rights organizations, it brings in mental health agencies and designated agencies, students, teachers, so that community schools coordinator has breadth of perspective, breadth of buy-in when assessing those needs, and also, more importantly, also making adjustments as the project moves forward. So those would be two sort of very specific recommendations that we would have for what we think would strengthen this bill, and allow for a successful response to make sure that, especially as we look to address this issue of trauma, it's able to be responsive to the needs, but also recognizing that those needs extend beyond the student, but into the community. And, we know our schools are in Vermont already are in many ways the center of our community and function that way. And that's an incredible resource and luxury that we have in our small state. And this allows it to build upon that and meet the needs of not just our youngest citizens, but hopefully other citizens as well. So I would happy to pause there for questions.
Questions for Mr. Robinson? Senator Lyons.
So, Colin, thank you. And thanks to the NEA for all the work that you have done. I know that you've had those terrific workshops and working with teachers. And so I guess I have two questions. One is, how can you keep, I know there's a lot of energy around this, so how are you going to keep that energy flowing and moving forward? And then what can we do to ensure that teachers coming into our schools are effectively trained in this area? So, I mean, it's kind of, and that's probably a question for all our higher ed people, but honestly, your insight would be helpful.
Great question.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Lyons. I think as it relates to the momentum, first of all, I don't think that our educators walk in, teachers, paraprofessionals, food service workers, bus drivers, they're in front of and working with students every single day. And that reflection of the trauma that students are experiencing is with them every single day. So they don't have the ability to ignore it, right? And so I think that lived experience of their profession is what, and making sure that they have the tools to be able to support students to be successful learners is what will help maintain the momentum. I think more broadly, it is thinking about the system-wide approaches, because, several years ago, we had teachers who would come to us and they say, well, my school's a trauma-informed school. And we're like, well, what does that mean? And what we found out is it meant a whole suite of things in different places. And in some places, quite frankly, it meant, they had one half-day professional development session on what trauma-informed meant. And now they're a trauma-informed school. Well, what we know is it's about deepening and integrating that practice into everything you do. And from soup to nuts, from the bus driver to the superintendent and all personnel inside the community that our schools inhabit. So I would say that I think that it will be maintained as long as we continue to lift it up, but the necessity of it is omnipresent because it's with our students every single day in their schools. And I apologize, Senator Lyons, I forgot your second question.
Oh, I guess it's related, and it's more about how can we ensure that teachers coming into the system have that
Great.
Training.
Yeah, so I think there are a couple ways to do that. One is And this is actually something that you've done in your literacy work, right? And the Vermont Standards Board of Professional Educators is actually the entity that reviews teacher preparation programs and the curriculum that's in there. And so in a very direct way, sort of making sure that that is part of the curriculum. I will say I'm a bit out of my depth, but I would be very, very surprised if teacher prep programs now aren't incorporating some components of trauma-informed practice into their teacher preparation. I don't want to say it's happening everywhere, and the quality and consistency with which it's being used, but I would be surprised if it's not already incorporated. But as you did with your literacy work, the Professional Standards Board of Vermont Professional Educators would be the place that actually reviews that curriculum that institutions of higher education are using.
Yes, as long as it's not 1 3-credit course in the sophomore year.
And no, and I think that's and that's where it really comes down to making sure the education system, and I think it is moving there, superintendents, school boards, I think everybody is embracing and realizing the need and necessity for this work. And so as a new career educator, you're right, 1 3-credit course does not make you an expert, right? But if it is deeply woven into the professional practice and the professional learning community of our education system, that is when and how you start to see these system changes. And I think that's what we're trying to cultivate through our work. But I know districts and across the state are trying to deepen into that work as well, to make sure that a new teacher who enters the profession isn't trying to figure it out, but they actually have support in doing that. I will sort of asterisk this is, every professional has a lot going on, right? And teachers, as you all know, have a lot going on. And in order to effectively do this work, it takes time. And that's both time in length, but also time in sort of specific sort of review of practice and collaboration with colleagues, and that's whether you're talking about literacy or whether you're talking about trauma. And so I think we also need to recognize, and I think we all do, that the horizon on this is long. And we also need to make sure that we're creating space for educators to step into that. And I will, one extra asterisk is teachers specifically, I think, have more time to collaborate on what that means in the school community than our school support staff, right? Because we can think of, a bus driver picks up, they're driving around, picking up kids every single day, dropping off every single day. They might be the one adult in that child's life who they have a deep relationship with, who's going to notice that something's off that day, right? But if that bus driver isn't integrated into the community, the educational community conversation about how to support that student in that moment, then they're not able to be as effective in supporting that student going forward. So I think we also need to make sure that our school support staff are able to have the space to step into this as well.
Thank you.
Senator Persley.
Thank you. Mr. Robinson, have you seen the what I'll call the Campion amendments to the bill that we talked about yesterday?
This is the literacy language?
Yes, I guess it is all literacy.
Oh,
maybe, I think
yeah.
so.
Yeah, I thought, you're not talking about S100, those Campion amendments.
No, there's Campion amendments everywhere. Now this is the 106. There's just a couple things, but I guess that question isn't really relative. I'm just looking at, that's the version I'm looking at that has the highlights that talk about adding literacy basically to what the
yeah. So Mr. Robinson, let me just step back for a minute. So yeah, so one of the things that we really haven't addressed yet as a committee, but I put on the table yesterday, is there a way to incorporate literacy into this a little bit? and took a stab with some language after working with a few of the folks that we've sort of been partnering with literacy, out there in the field, and came up with some language. I don't know if you have it in front of you, or if, and these are just, sort of broad strokes. I don't know if you, I'd welcome any, honestly, any comments at all.
So I did see it on the website, and quite frankly, I don't think there's anything. I think it makes sense to add it. I think the key thing about the community schools model is, as we've talked about previously, it's the community figuring out what the specific needs are going to be. And obviously we know there's going to be literacy needs in every school, because that is one of the foundations of learning, right? So putting extra emphasis on it in this context seems perfectly appropriate to me. I will say at the end of the day, right, it's going to be based upon the needs assessment and the school-based sort of leadership team figuring out, okay, in this particular moment, what are the direct needs going to be that are going to help us realize our goals. And obviously that could and easily should include literacy, but it could obviously go to, as is also in the language, supporting English language learners and other specific examples. So that addition seemed totally reasonable to me.
Well, one of the reasons I brought up that language is because the first one example, maybe we just talked about it as a committee. We don't have to talk about it specifically with you, Colin, but I know you have a lot of knowledge about how this was done in New Mexico and other places, because there's a shall in there. It's like it shall include access to literacy instruction. So I don't know if that's getting ahead of the assessment and saying, whatever, no matter what the assessment is, this is going to be part of it. Was just a concern I had in reading it today. But my more pointed question to you, I looked at your written testimony.
Yes.
And you talked about the needs assessment being added to that section 3D1.
Yep.
But the way I read it, it is in there. So I didn't know if you disagreed that it isn't, because even though the way it's written, it says use the grant funding to hire a school coordinator, and then below it says if the funding is used to hire a community school coordinator, then you have to do the assessment. But you basically have to use the money to hire a coordinator, so it seems like you have to do the assessment regardless. But your written testimony made it seem that you didn't think that it was required.
Yeah, so thank you, Senator Perchlik, for that question, because it is my point here is nuanced. And specifically why I mentioned D1 is this notion. One thing that the House did, and I think makes sense, is there could be somebody already on staff who they say they want to move into this work. What we want to make sure is, even if you're doing that, you're still doing a needs assessment. You're not only doing a needs assessment if you're hiring a new person to do this work. So what I'm trying to capture there is specifically saying the needs assessment needs to happen whether it's a new hire or a sort of a repurposing of an existing staff member. So that was the clarity that I was going for in that section, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, that does make sense. But yeah. You could read it both ways.
Yeah. So that was my my attempt there, and what I was driving at. I didn't want sort of since the needs assessment is so critical, didn't want the sort of notion to be, well, you're just repurposing somebody, you can skip to step 2, when step 1 is foundational to the efficacy and fidelity of the model.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
So the needs assessment, you would find, so this would be done, just for clarification, by this new hire or by this person, or you're just saying the school might do it prior to hiring somebody?
Yeah. So Senator Campbell, good question. So it was originally drafted, and you see this in some other legislation. They actually have a first year is a implementation grant. So
Yeah.
when H106 was introduced, it was actually $20,000 for an implementation grant. So the district goes out, does a needs assessment, uses that grant to help build out the site-based leadership team, the school-based leadership team, and then in year 2, they hire the community schools coordinator.
Yeah.
In the House, they were compressing that a little bit, and said, let's jumpstart this, and let's, we know the needs are great, so let's bring this person on board. I also think from a practical matter, given where schools are right now, in order for an effective needs assessment to be done and a leadership team to be built, I think you actually do need a person to own it. There's not a lot of breathing room in schools right now to take on extra work. So I think there is value in having this sort of hiring happen immediately. But there was this initial idea that the first year would be a planning phase.
Yeah.
And I will say I maybe skipped ahead and read the Deputy Secretary's testimony that she's going to be giving a little bit later. And she speaks to next year being a good time to do this work, not necessarily right now. And I would just flag that for you, that this in H106 as originally drafted and in other bills, that first year can be modeled as an implementation grant for doing some of that work. And so I just sort of flagged that concept for you going forward. But as envisioned right now in the language, and we support it, is that the community schools coordinator would be doing that work and owning that work now.
And also, it might be back to the conversation, about literacy and other things. It might be that we might have to, maybe you could take a look at the language as I think we're inclined to incorporate your language with these assessment and we do want to, if that shouldn't be there, let's just keep an eye on that. I think we'll continue to look at that. We'll probably look at a clean draft, on Tuesday with the committee. I told the chair of Probes, we'd be looking at maybe midweek of voting something out. But I told her that we were inclined to, to move forward with this year. So, so let's just, and maybe you can help us just make sure, again, we're not getting ahead of ourselves, if you will. Like some of those needs assessments might really identify literacy or something else, but others, it might be really focused solely on trauma,
Right.
So.
Yep, exactly.
Great.
I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, that'd be great if you would just keep an eye on it with us. Any other questions for Mr. Robinson before we move to Mr. Myers? Thanks a million for being with us, Colin.
Yeah, thank you all for your work.
Yep. Is it Dr. Myers?
It's Chuck Myers. I am a licensed clinical psychologist, but everybody calls me Chuck. So
right. Well, Chuck, I'm Brian, and we're thrilled to have you here. Really appreciate it. Senator Lyons had mentioned you as being a good person to have this conversation with us. So thank her as well.
Without apologies. Without apologies.
Without apologies. Right. So you've heard the conversation. You have a sense of some of the things that I wouldn't even say grappling with. We're just talking about, how can we really address this, help children that we've heard so much from teachers and principals and others that really are facing a lot of kids out there. And hopefully, possibly you've had a chance to look at the bill, and just wondering if you have any comments or any suggestions for us.
Well, thank you, Senator Campion, and for your leadership on this issue, for your leadership in the committee, and making sure that, and thank you, your entire committee, for taking the time to really get into the weeds and talk about some of these just essential issues that are facing kids and teachers and families, administrators in schools. There has been no more challenging time than the last 14 months in the lives of kids and families and educators in my lifetime, probably in our lifetime. And thank you, Senator Lyons, for raising my name and for the invitation to come and talk with you. I will have some comments in general, and then I want to make sure there's plenty of time for conversations. I really appreciate the conversational tone that you've maintained. and it really, especially because it reflects the kind of social, cultural environment we tend to choose to live in Vermont for, which is one of relational integrity and respect for our youngsters being the future of our society, and willing to make commitments to support those kids no matter what it takes. So what I want to talk a little bit about is trauma, and I really appreciate Dr. Ratu's structural kind of framework and conceptual framework for kind of laying it out. I think it's very helpful, as he mentioned, to talk about stress, that no learning happens without stress. And in fact, if you want to think about it, we have, as stress increases to a certain degree, actually stress is instrumental in helping us learn new material, integrate new material. However, when we reach a certain level of stress, it no longer becomes productive in assisting with the educational process, and in fact becomes deleterious, because we're so overwhelmed with our stress that it's hard for us to integrate new information into what we already know. So, so I really applaud Dr. Ratu's kind of framework for that, and wanted to really stress that. Wanted also to go back to a little bit of what we know now about developing brains is that when kids live in an environment in which they're dealing with overwhelming amounts of stress a lot of the time, what we know about the brain is that repeated experiences shape neural networks. And so what we know is that kids who are living in those kind of stressful environments a lot are acting as though that's the environment they're in, even when they're in an environment where that's not the case. So a kid that is stressed and fearful, let's just take, for instance, in a home where there may be physical, sexual abuse, maybe there's parental violence, let's use that as an example, and they're concerned about that. They go to school, they're not necessarily saying, okay, I'm with my teacher, I know it's safe here. They may still be acting out of, oh my gosh, I'm not sure that that's a person, when they move quickly, I'm not sure they're not going to come after me. And it's hard to know which kind of environmental set of expectations they're functioning from, which makes it really tough to decipher what's driving those behaviors. Is it that this is a typical 12, 13-year-old, let's take a boy, who is thinking about it's springtime now, it's sunny out, by golly, I can go out and, you know, get out and do some stuff? Or is it really functioning out as a kid responding out of the 12, 13 years of not knowing whether they were going to get a meal or not knowing who was going to be home to take care of them and their kids, maybe, or their younger siblings. So it's those things that kids are bringing to schools and to teachers and administrators on a regular daily basis that have driven our educators to try to figure out what the Sam Hill they're going to do with all this stuff going on in their classrooms and schools, and weren't quite sure exactly what to do, which is why folks have reached out a lot to us, to folks at NFI. And I can just take kind of a sidestep here from trauma and talk a little bit about our experience at NFI with trauma. At this point, we've trained for a different length of time, sometimes just a couple of days, sometimes months on end, probably over 100 school supervisory unions in the state of Vermont. We're also doing training in the state of New York and contracting with folks in New Hampshire, mostly because we've had a group of clinicians who've taken a deep dive on what might be considered, what some people call developmental trauma. One of the people we've worked pretty strongly with is Bruce Perry, and I'm not here to do any advertisements for him, but he does have a book coming out with Oprah Winfrey on Tuesday, in which she will be describing trauma that she experienced as a kid, and they've written the book together. There's some great interviews that will be happening with that launch, but the point of it being that we've tried to access people who've approached trauma from not necessarily an evidence-based perspective, but from an emerging edge kind of a practice. And as we've done that, we've learned a lot about it. And as we've done that, we've joined with educators, and they have taught us an awful lot about it too. So at this point, most of what we're doing in schools at NFI is we're working with schools school superintendents, with principals, with their leadership teams, and really helping them implement trauma-informed practices on an organizational level. So one way to approach this is on a kid-by-kid kind of a basis is Chuck coming to school, having had experiences at home that probably might be trauma-related. And another way to approach this is going back to the ACEs study that Dr. Ratu talked about, which was done back in the 1990s. What they found out is that probably 60% of a very high functioning subgroup of the population in California had experienced some form of childhood trauma. What that translates into is that 60% of any particular group that we're a part of, we can expect somebody has experienced some amount of childhood trauma. We also know that if you've experienced one episode of childhood trauma, one type of childhood trauma, the chances are very high you have experienced more than one. So what that means is that not only are the kids coming to school experiencing trauma at home, but the staff who are coming to school, including the teachers and administrators, probably there's a very high probability that they also have experienced trauma in their life. As a result, they may be triggered by experiences that would touch their experience of being traumatized in the past. As a result, we need to think about the organizational impact of that and what we're doing as an organization to support our staff and the people that we serve. So I think one of the reasons people have come to NFI is because this is exactly the kind of deep dive we've done at NFI, because we're an organization. I believe probably at least 60% of my staff have experienced some kind of traumatic experience. And so we've done a pretty deep dive. So we've had for a number of years been focusing on the traumatic experience of BIPOC folks living in community culture with institutional racism, and trying to understand what we can do to support those folks. So that's a part of what we're doing, a part of how I'm approaching this conversation. I applaud this legislation. I think it's great. I think getting back to one of Senator Lyons' questions about, so who's responsible? And the right answer being we all are. The key is in the title of this particular bill and the responsibility, the job title for the coordinator. Because the community coordinator is about coordinating resources for kids in schools. It's about trying to bring together, in my mind, the vision I'm reading into the bill, and I think I'm reading the correct purpose, is that this is someone who's trying to pull from all sources to ensure that each school community has the resources they need to address appropriate and high levels of education. One of the things I would include in that is that there be a focus on training around developmental trauma, toxic stress, whatever term folks feel comfortable using for this coordinator and for the leadership team of the organization. I think that would be very helpful. There are a lot of folks who can do that. It's just NFI does not have a monopoly on doing this training. There's a lot of folks who are doing these kinds of trainings nowadays. And frankly, we're so busy, I'm not sure we could fit much in. But we have found that it's been very helpful to the teams that we've set with and talked about around this issue, for them to be looking at it through the trauma-informed lens that Dr. Ratu was talking about. And coordinating resources from mental health, from the local community. I really want to support Mr. Robinson's Cohen's comments about how each school community really should be empowered to develop their own idea of what the needs are for them, for the community they're serving, and be empowered to implement the kinds of general training, specific trainings, general trainings, and experiences and resources they feel like they need. It's really important because schools are such an important part of communities that the communities feel like they have input into those resources and this project. And I love the way Colin was talking about really empowering communities to own this process, take major roles in it. So I would agree with all of those comments and support the work of the committee. Glad to take any questions.
Thanks, Chuck. I really appreciate it. Committee, any questions or comments? Senator Lyons.
Thank you very much. Again, you're always very helpful and insightful on this. But we had a preview of what we might be hearing from AOE on this and suggesting that we wait a year or, not go forward right now. And I have my own thoughts on that, but I'm just curious as to what you might be thinking about that thought of moving ahead now or waiting until schools get their feet on the ground.
That's a great question. Like I said, in the best of all possible worlds, I'd like to take a little more time to think about that, but you put me on the spot, so let me jump into the fray.
You can think about it if you'd like.
Let me take a chance to try and answer it now. My belief is that schools, the educational system, like most systems in our state right now, are swamped and have been overwhelmed for a while. They're doing the best they can. They've got a lot of resources, very resourceful people, administrations, organizations supported, I think, very in a very dedicated way by AOE. I also believe that there are kids that are right now experiencing enormous amounts of stress that a lot of folks would consider trauma. I am deeply concerned, as I think most folks are, that the lockdowns of the pandemic mean that many kids have been suffering without the more direct supervision, awareness, monitoring of teachers and educators and people in educational systems. So I think to hold off would be unfortunate. I understand it's an awful lot to ask of educational agencies, of schools themselves, and perhaps it's an option that you all would consider empowering the local education agency to make. So I could imagine where some would feel like, my gosh, this is what we're doing right now. This all fits into anyway. So let's do that. Let's get these dollars in. Let's get a person who is not responsible for teaching or submitting budgets or dealing with the school board. And let's make sure we get that person on board to help us sort all of this stuff out, because we're going to sort 80% of this stuff out anyway, and they can help with some of that. Others may feel like, oh my gosh, it's one more thing I just don't have time to attend to. I got to find somebody, and I don't have, enough teachers, administrators for now. So I know that may be begging the question, but that's my thought.
Thank you. That's all incredibly helpful, and really appreciate you coming in. And if you don't mind, we may be looping back to you in the next several days as we hopefully will put some final thoughts on paper and perhaps have you respond again. But for now, I think we will leave it there.
Real good. Well, I'm more than happy to respond at your convenience, and good luck with this. Again, thank you so much for
Thank you very much. Really appreciate
taking
it.
this on. Take care.
Excellent.
Bye-bye.
Okay, committee, why don't we, I think, Dr. Retu, I think we're going to take a break for 10 minutes, and then we are going to return with the secretary to have him respond to school facilities bill, and then we'll have a vote on that either soon thereafter. We also have the Deputy Secretary Boucher coming in to talk a little bit about 106. Any questions before we take a 10-minute break? Okay, see you in 10. Thanks, everyone.